All right, Garrett Blevins here with a explanation of the program updates to the BCR programming. Some of you may have not been familiar with the old program, but basically, as you look at the info page here, load drops were the only way in which the old program functioned, and now things have been updated. Additionally, the color scheme and the way things work has been changed, so I'm going to be going over that a little bit here. So let's hop straight into tab number 1. Now, if you happen to, when you open this, see the information like this really small, sometimes when certain computers or certain versions of Excel will open a page, it will be very small. And so you'll want to zoom in. You can do that either by coming down and looking for some sort of zoom slider on the bottom, or you can go to the View tab. I recommend about 100. I think that makes it look right, and that's usually what I use to actually do the programming. Additionally, you can choose to, enable or disable grid lines, which are the little lines that separate out everything. I usually leave those off. I like it to just be plain white in the background. And I would also advise that you put the headings in there. I think that makes it easier to use. Like any Excel sheet, you may have hidden rows, and those can be opened by these sliders that look like little plus or minus signs, and that opens up information. Additionally, there are some hidden rows as well, and right now I'm just going to open up everything. The reason why you hide rows is because you can have a lot of extra information in there that you don't necessarily want someone to see or have to look through. It just is better to have things be a little bit more simple, but you can open it up if you want to look into it. Basically, one of the most important hidden areas is this volume, number of lift, volume per set, fatigue percent, or stress index section. And those totals are added up here, but you'll notice that there's a lot of zeros and there's a lot of these value formulas. And the reason for that is these question marks, which we'll get to in a minute. But all of this information that you see here, even if you only have one tab, will be populated into your graphs section. And you see here number of lifts and volume. However, you may notice that when you start, your volume is like 0 for some of the weeks, and you may scratch your head and be like, how can that be the case? Well, it can be the case because of the question mark. So we're going to hop in and actually pretend like we're going to go through and perform a week. So you'll notice that you have the type of exercise listed here. So we've got our squat rows here in red, and red will always be associated with squat, at least on this version. There may be future versions, which I have been kind of already putting in production, where color palettes will be adjusted, and you'll able to change the colors based on your personal preferences. But bench right now is kind of this tan color, and deadlifts is this really dark brown, almost black color. And so, that should say deadlift, not squat. Don't know how that happened. Anyways, moving on. You'll see the exercise here, and so you're going to be, if this was my day, starting with block 1 here, I would have high bar squats for 1 set of 6 at RPE 8. And so I have this question mark here. That means that I don't have a high bar max that I have for me or the client that would be using this program. And so they're going to have to use RPE to figure out this initial set. And you'll notice that almost all the time there is one initial set to start. Now that can change, and there's various reasons why through the coaching call especially I might recommend people do 2 initial sets at the same weight, repeating that same amount of weight. But most of the time you want 1 activator set to get you started for the day. So let's say I did 1 set of 6. You'll notice that there are some formulas in this cell where there's this question mark populated. You don't need to keep those there. So you're just going to actually delete and clear that out entirely, and you're going to write in what you used. Let's say I used 455. After I would do that, I would enter it into the cell, and you'll notice that this back offset is automatically populated with 430. So I would be doing 1 set of high bar, and I ended up working up to 455, which was an RP8. And then I'm going to lower the weight, as you can see as listed here, load drop, to 430. And I'm going to continue doing that 430 weight until it feels like an RPE 8. Again, that 430 is automatically populated from this number. If I had done, say, 500, this number would automatically change. And so you're just going to worry about entering that initial set, and the rest will take care of itself. So you've got RPE 8 here. You would do as many back off sets as needed to get there. Now, I've put in what I think is the approximate number of back off sets, but there's so many factors that could impact that. You may be above or below this 3, and that's why there's a question mark behind the 3. When you finally enter in your actual number, you're going to want to put what you actually did there. And what I want you to do is use what I call the 50% rule. So you can do 50% of what's listed here or 150% of what's listed here, but that's kind of the range I want you in. So for 3 reps, you could do, for 3 sets, you could do either 2 sets or 4 sets, but I wouldn't want you to do 7 sets. That would be too much on this day. It would mess you up for later in the week and what's planned. So use those set recommendations as a guide. You know, if it said 4 question mark, you could have a range of 2 to 6. So we're going to call that the 50% rule. You can go within 50% plus or minus of the recommended number of sets. After you would complete that, let's say we ended up, you know, we were pretty tired on this day and we only did 2 sets. We would put our 2 in there and then we would move on. And as you change the number of sets and amount of work that you do, the fatigue that's tracked, which is one of the most interesting and important updates of this program, will change automatically. Basically, I'm going to be monitoring how much fatigue you carry based off how many sets you do and what RPE those sets are that you're doing. And that's what this number represents for me, which would be very valuable for coaching and for your own tracking. But after we do our 2 sets of 6 and 430 feels exactly as hard as that initial 455, since we're doing them both at RP8s, we would move on to the next exercise, which here happens to be close grip. And we would do the same thing. We'd work up to a set of 6. Let's say maybe it's at 335. And then it automatically populates and we would go. And let's say on bench we felt good this day and it took 5 back off sets to make 310 feel just as hard as 335. And that's all you would do is you go through the program each day, you would move through. Now, when you have competition movements, there may be some automatically populated numbers. Let me see if I can find an example of that. Here we go. So because I'm a low bar squatter and I actually have a max that I can work off of for that, I will give recommendations when they're competition movements. However, you still want to always use RPE as your guide in this program. RPE is king, and so you want to use RPE as you go through the program to gauge that initial set. You'll also notice that in this case there are going to be 2 initial sets, so you're going to do 2 sets, or I would do 2 sets at 615 if in fact that turned out to be an RP7, which it probably would. I would do 2 sets before going into my back off work. And this would be a very fatiguing day, by the way, as you see this 2 initial sets of fairly heavy triples. RP7 is a little taxing, followed up by back off triples. But you'll notice there's a very substantial drop from 615 to 655. And the larger the drop, the more back off sets I'm going to expect that you can get. And that's how load drops work. Now, I want you to pay close attention as you go through this, because as you'll notice, we're doing sets of 6 on week 1, but we're doing sets of 5 on week 2. And the reps are actually going to modulate back and forth week to week most of the time through this training cycle. Additionally, as you can see, on weeks 1 and 2, almost everything is load drops. But as you come over to weeks 3 and 4 of this 4-week block, you're going to see that there's a change. Now there's something called rep increase and repeat. Everything is going to be the same as far as how you implement it, so I would still work up to high bar, 1 set of 7 at RP8. I might even look back over here and see like, okay, well I did a set of 6 over here at RP8 and it was 655. Well, maybe this, if I'm looking at target numbers and if things are consistent, would probably be about 435. So I would know that going into my warm-ups and kind of have that in my head. If that was undershooting, I would increase the weights as I was warming up and feeling things out. Maybe I'm tired on week 3 or I've had a cold over the weekend or something, and maybe it'd be less. You want to use, again, RPE as your guide. After you do that initial primer set of 7, you're going to have a rep increase. And so the number of reps is going to go from 7 up to 9. But, as you'll notice, the weight has dropped substantially. Now again, there's no question mark on this rep increase row, so I don't want you to do a lot of sets. I want you to do the number of sets written unless there's a question mark next to it. So this happens to be 1, so I want you to do 1 set of 9. Then I want you to repeat that same weight for a certain number of sets. You'll know how many sets to do by looking at RPE. So when this this rep increase work with 390 feels as hard as the initial set of 7 did because they're both RPE 8s, that's when you'll stop. So I would do 1 set of 7 at 435. It felt like an 8, so that's the weight that I used as my initial set. I would then do 1 set at 390, which would probably, I've estimated here that it would feel like an RPE 7, but even if it felt like an RPE 6, it wouldn't matter because the goal is to work up to an RPE 8 with 9 reps at 390. And I would continue doing sets of 390 until I hit that RPE 8, which I'm assuming here is going to take 4 total sets. That one initial rep increase set followed by 3 additional sets. And that's how I think this day would end up. And then you would actually enter in the number of sets that you did as you were repeating that secondary rep increase. The way that repeat sets go is you just repeat the same weight, which is kind of obvious, but you're increasing the RPE a certain amount. So that's how the programs are going to work. So we've got load drop, rep increases, and repeat sets. As you go through and you enter in information, if you'll remember our graph initially for volume was 0 or flatlined across this section. Now you'll see that there are some changes because we adjusted some numbers in week 1 and some numbers in week 3. So these charts aren't going to stay the same as you go through the program, and it'll kind of only be once you've filled out the information that these graphs are going to be useful. But that is how the new programs go. If you open up some of these things, you may see stress index. You'll notice that, if we've got 7.5 there, if we doubled this from 2 sets to 4 sets, that number is going to change. And so that stress index is really helping monitor the number of sets and how much volume we're doing in a way that's better than just a volume number, because these are going to scale based off of RPE. And that's the most helpful and the biggest update in this program. For general rule of thumb, your upper and lower fatigue, if it's about, in the 50 to 60 range, that's going to be a pretty easy week. If it's around 75 to 85, that's going to be a moderate week. Kind of your bread and butter numbers are going to be in there. And if you're in the 90 to 105 or 90 to 110 range, that's going to be a much harder week. Depending on what level of athlete you are or where you're at in your training career, you're going to be maybe a little different and deviate from those numbers. There's not a 100% bulletproof number that you just know. That's something that you learn as you go through and you look at the results. So that's how the programs work. You'll just, the weeks, it should be obvious at this point, but week 1 is right here. And then as you go through, week 2 is next to it, week 3 is next to it, and week 4. And be sure that you're always moving over to the correct tab as you get updates. For me, I'll send out those tabs one at a time every 4 weeks. In any case, I'm glad you're aboard the Blessed Programming group, and I hope that this new program is another step towards the optimal program for you. Wherever you're at, I hope you're doing well. Blessings.